So that's the first source of error. It is systematic. All right? The second source of error is random. Suppose you do like what students tend to do when you give them questionnaires. They don't read the question. Have you ever gotten back a survey from somebody who's just circled 3 all the way down? 3. I set that in the garbage because I realized that the person is not reading the questions. So the response you put, is it necessarily what you would have put if you were reading? No. So you know, the respondent, you have put error into the question. All right? And we call that lack of reliability. That is where we could not rely on you to answer correctly for whatever reason. All right? And that is what we call random error. So when I ask you a question, I recycle, yes or no, sometimes, no. And say this is 1 and this is 2 and this is 3 and you circle, no, 3. All right? That is really the observed score, your XO, what I observed that you put. But that XO can have in some error. It can be your true score. If XO is equal to XT, the question was reliable and it was valid. What you actually put is really your true score. But just suppose you did not understand what I meant by recycling. Your observed score 3 is really XT plus X what? XS. Systematic error. Because you didn't understand what I meant by recycling. And if maybe you understood, you understood what I was asking, but you didn't take time to respond to the question properly, your observed score 3 is really XT plus XR, which is random error. So what I'm saying is that you can circle something on a questionnaire. It may be your true score because you understood what I was asking you and you took time to read it properly and you put the correct response. Or it may have some element of error in it, whether it be systematic error because you didn't understand what the researcher was asking you, he did not make himself clear, or you didn't take the time to respond to it properly. You got that? Good. Wonderful. Now, I handed you some sheets. I gave you some sheets last time. I hope when I got them sheets. They look like this. Familiar? Mine look kind of raggedy. Huh? You have to learn it? No, I'm not into all the equations and all things. For me, you would have done all those things at statistics. I'm into understanding concepts. The moral of the story here is done. Is that you have to do pilot testing when you're doing questionnaires so people understand what you're asking them and you know that they understand. All right? And the next moral of the story here is, which you will come up to, is that is why people will give you questionnaires and they will ask you the same question in 10 different ways. Because they want to make sure that you are answering that question reliably. That's why when you get a lot of academic questionnaires, they use somebody asking me the same stupid question over and over again. There's a reason for that. Because we want to use that redundancy to test how reliable you've been in your responses. All right, so the real moral of the story is pre-testing of questionnaires and sometimes building in redundancy to ensure that what the persons are saying, they really mean to say. All right, so ain't so much about the equations, okay? Yeah. Now, let's look here at the bottom of this paper. And if you have a case where you have both random error and systematic error, you have situation 1. Situation 1. Now let me explain situation 1 to you. In situation 1, I may have asked you several questions, aiming that those questions would mean the same thing to you. Therefore, you should give me a similar response. For example, if you look at this scale on inner directedness, I would want that if you were inner directed, you would answer all of these questions basically the same way. Y'all get what I'm saying? You would answer, I would have put in redundancy in there, and you would have answered all of these questions. If you were highly inner directed, you would be on the high end of the scale. So you would be doing a lot of agreeing and strongly agreeing. But if you were outer directed, you would be the responses to these questions here would be more like 1s and 2s because you would be on the lower end of the scale. But I know that I have a reliability problem. If questions that are supposed to be similar, you might answer 4 on it, and then you down here, you answering a 1. So in your mind, those questions are they're not the same, or you were so busy you're just circling, so you weren't reading. Either way, those questions are not reliable because you are not answering those questions that are supposed to be alike in the same way. So that's why your responses are all over the place. You see all the dots all over the place? Either you didn't answer reliably, or you didn't understand all of these questions to be similar. So what we have in that is random error. All right? There's also systematic error in there. Because if you understood what the researcher was asking, you would be in the bullseye. The researcher is trying to get into that middle hole in there and zeroing into what inner directedness is. He's trying to capture what the concept of inner directedness means. But if you are not answering in the bullseye, he hasn't gotten in there. In other words, the questions that he has developed hasn't captured the construct as to what inner directedness is. His questions are all over the place. They don't tap in to what inner directedness should be. So we are not in the bullseye. Situation 2 is where, guess what? You are answering all the questions in the same way because they're all together here. Look, you're answering all the questions in the same way. The questions are like to you, but guess what? He's measuring something besides inner directedness. So you are answering reliably because all these questions are about the same to you, but they're not tapping into what the researcher is supposed to be measuring. Sometimes a researcher is thinking they're measuring one construct, and they're measuring something else. So even though you are giving me reliable responses, you are giving me reliable responses to something besides inner directedness. And that is situation 2. Just a minute. Situation 3 is where he has successfully measured what inner directedness is. He's in the bullseye. And you have understood all of the questions to mean roughly the same thing, so you are answering them just about the same point on the scale. So with situation 3, you do not have any error in the responses. The observed scores of the persons who answered are really their true scores. Are y'all following me? That is why you do testing for reliability and validity, which is why I can teach you now how to do the testing. Because when you've done the testing, is then you just get an idea, then shoot, I may not have measured the right thing here. But for a lot of people out there doing basic marketing research, they just come up with questions. That is why academics are the ones who need to develop skills properly, make sure those skills are valid skills, and then hand them to researchers like you to use. But there's a disconnect. The academics got the time to do the validity testing. You know who doing research for people, you just trying, so-and-so want a questionnaire to figure out what's the store image. And you just throw down a few questions and you don't even realize that there are other ways that store image should be measured, because the academics sat down with people and did the focus groups and got into their minds and figure out how they think about store image. Alright? So you only measure half of what store image should be because you did not go and dig out a scale that some academic did and made sure that the scale had a high level of reliability and validity to use. Alright? So a lot of times market researchers out there use questionnaires, but they don't really tap into what they should be asking. So then when they give the people the results, what's going to happen? Think about it. So there really needs to be a connect between academia that would have the time to develop marketing skills and researchers who don't. I have a book about this tick solo. You know what that book contains? Marketing skills. Skills that marketing academics have developed that I can then use in questionnaires. And some of you, when I sent back to you this week, there are 2 groups. I said to you, have you come across any skills that measure what? Quality of life or anything to do with socio-psychological impact. Y'all understand what I'm saying? I'm saying go out there and see what the academics have come up with, the skills that they have tried and proven, and put them in your questionnaire. It will make it stronger. It will make it longer. There's no getting away from that because we have to use a lot of redundancy, and I'll explain that to you in a minute, but it will make it stronger. All right, and it will be able to stand up to more scrutiny. All right, so y'all understand what's going here so far? That sometimes a person is developing a set of questions and they ain't really met the construct yet. It might be something close, but it's not quite the construct. All right, so any questions so far? So now I want to talk to you about how we test for reliability. How we test to make sure that you are seeing all the questions in the same way, or you have answered all the questions in the same way. And then I want to tell you how we as researchers test for validity. That is making sure that we have really hit the bullseye and we are really measuring the construct as it should be measured. All right, so I can show you the reliability testing first, how you test for that, and then how you test for validity. Y'all are still with me? What that mean, Charmaine? Huh? Yeah, because these concepts are not that easy to understand. I know that right well. So reliability is the tendency in a respondent to respond in the same way. They're going to respond in the same way if these questions mean basically the same thing to them. So my greatest achievements are ahead of me. I often think about whether I'm making a good impression on others. I feel that nothing in life can substitute for achievement. I feel satisfied with my life. The Eastern religions are more appealing. I enjoy getting involved. I feel I understand where my life is going. I spend a good deal of time. We have found if a person is inner directed, they will strongly agree or agree with most of these statements. All right? So if they're responding reliably and these statements all mean the same thing to them, and they should all be responding high, agreeing or strongly agreeing. If they're not inner directed, they're outer directed. They reach out to people. They don't always be just thinking about me and achievement. They're more affection and affiliation oriented. We're going to find that they should be lower on the scale and they should respond the same way. We should see reliability. So reliability is consistency. All right? Consistency. Now, I'm going to give you 1, 2, 3, 4 ways that we measure reliability. 4 ways. All right, let's get to some examples here. The first method that we use to measure reliability is something we call test, retest. Test, retest. But before I do that, I want to look at what a correlation is. Because to understand reliability, you must understand correlation. Have you ever heard that term before, correlation? What does it mean? That's causation. That is very close, Karen. Good try. But that is causation. That ain't correlation. Causation is when a change in one variable drives a change in another. Correlation is necessary for causation, but it is not causation. What is correlation? Anybody can remember? Kinda. It is a measure of how much two variables move together. It is a measure, that's the layman's term I could give you. It's a measure of how much two variables move together. Now, look. If I look at two variables, liking for UE and GPA. Look at this. One, two, three, four, five. So this would be disagree, and this they'd be strongly disagree, and this would be strongly agree, and this would be liking for UE. And this would be your GPA. GPA can go from anywhere on maybe to 4 point. The highest GPA I've ever seen in an examiner's meeting. 4.2 or some craziness. You know, they got people who play so bright, but something 4.4. That is madness, but they got people here is getting them to our GPAs, especially when they're really mathematically oriented and they could do economics and account, they get them to our GPAs. Not when they're in management. We can't handle that all the reading, right? But suppose we saw something like this. I measure 6 people on this, right? And I found that. Do you see instances of persons with high GPA liking UE? Do you see instances of persons with, there are 6 persons I observed. These are observed scores here. So I will call that X1, X2, X3, X4, X5, X6. I only measure 6 people. Do you see instances of persons with high GPA liking UE? Where? X2. Do you see instances of persons with high GPA hating UE? X1. Do you see instances of persons liking UE but they gain a lot of marks? Do you see any pattern in those variables? I am not seeing as one is moving up, the other one is moving down, or as one is moving up, the other one is moving along with it. There's no correlation. I can't run nothing through them points. Oh, when I run through a point, I get that up. But suppose I had seen something like this. I am seeing the tendency here that as the person's GPA goes up, their liking for UE is also going up. So there's some positive correlation. Those variables are moving together. Or I might have found this, look. That, believe it or not, that as people's GPA is going down, their liking for UE is going up. That don't make no sense. But I might find it. Because it could be that those people love the fact that UE is a party place. I love it here, man. You know? Double nose, facts. So I might actually find that as people's GPA going down, their liking for UE got up. Either way, this now is a negative correlation because as one variable is coming down, the next one is going up. These are variables that are moving together. There's no correlation here. Because sometimes one high and all over the place. All right? So do you understand the concept of correlation? Or don't you? So now you understand the concept of correlation. Let's now turn to the concept of measuring reliability. The first measure of reliability, are you following me, Ms. Stanford, is test, retest reliability. This is what we do with test, retest. This is how we prove that the questions meant the same thing to you and you were answering them. You took time to read them so you would actually see that they meant the same thing to you. You were consistent. Reliability is consistency. This is what we would do. Test and then retest. All right? So I will give you the questionnaire today and then give you the exact same questionnaire 2 weeks from now. And I will match the responses, all right, between the two to see if indeed you were answering reliably. Because if you answer it this way today, the same question, you shouldn't be answering it the same way next week. Yeah. So I'm doing what we call test, retest. That is how I test for reliability. I test you using the same questionnaire twice. What do you perceive could be some of the problems with test, retest? We don't like test, retest anymore. What do you think could be some of the problems with it? Twice. It's finding the same people to do it because you can't use different people. You got to use the same people because I'm measuring whether Andrea understood and did the same thing and was reliable and consistent 2 weeks from now from when it was 2 weeks ago. You get me? Thank you, Ms. Harper. So the first part with test, retest is finding same respondents. The second point raised by Ms. Harper is that the fact that you did the first one negatively influences you doing the second one. Called from the time you realize them is the same thing. Human beings use heuristics wherever possible. Look, you can come in here and you can sit in the same place almost every week if you could, because you don't want to deal with not knowing if that chair down there gonna hold it you weight. You don't want to deal with the nasty looks that Amanda might give because it's she chair that you say no ain't. So we just always try to use shortcuts. So that happens when you're doing the test the second time. You're going to try to remember what you put. So in remembering what you put, am I really testing you again? So the fact that you took the test before can negatively influence your taking of the test and you actually taking the time now to sit down and read it properly again. So then I measure consistency. Any other possible issues with test, retest? Any other possible issues? Personal factors and environmental factors. How do you feel? Or you know that something could have happened that could cause me to change my response on that to me in that 2-week period? I ain't for the death penalty, and in that 2 weeks, some idiot killed my best friend, and I wish that he would drop dead. How my response gonna be a thing? So changes in the respondent's environment or personality. Or frame of mind or attitude. In the time between the two tests. So really and truthfully, there can't be no consistency there. You know why? Because I have changed. So when you run the reliability test, you're not going to find that consistency between the two results. Test retest. So they got some issues with test retest. Finding the people, keeping the people the same, and ensuring that the people ain't changed because they did the test already. So test retest is not that popular anymore as a reliability testing mechanism, for want of a better word. Y'all still with me? Yeah. Now, there's something called equivalent forms. Now, I want to show you something before you do the test retest. I want to talk about equivalent forms because there's something that's going to flow through the whole thing. What do they actually do the correlation for? Or what do we actually correlate for test retest? I want to show you. You remember I just drew this thing here with the liking. And the GPA. Will I confuse them if Josie, you confuse them? No, I don't want to say it. Let me say something else. Because really and truthfully, this is what I would tell you, right? I don't even need to explain this to you because as market researchers, the system does run these tests. You all what I'm saying? You get what I'm saying? The system runs these tests and we don't really bother so much about the actual things that the statisticians, the formulas that they use because we ain't too worried about that. But let me just explain to you what we would look at. Say 100 people answered a question on a questionnaire. And then the same 100 people answer the question on the questionnaire next time. I will either take the average score for that 100 and correlate it with the average score for the same 100 responses on that question and see how closely they're correlated. Or I will take the two total scores and correlate them. In other words, if 100 people answer this question, and you said 3, he said 4, he said 2, and then the average was 3.5 for the 100, that's the test. Then I'm going to work out the average score for the retest and correlate those two scores to see how closely they're correlated. That's how the retest will work. Or I will correlate the total score. So I will add up the 2, the 4, the 5, the 6, the 100 scores, and then correlate them with the thing, and then they're going to run the correlation, and they're going to see how close they are together. Y'all get that? Right? So I will either correlate the average scores on a question or the total scores. Y'all still with me? Lost? What happened? You lost? Huh? You good? All right. So that's the test score. And then you correlate it now with the retest score. Now this equivalent forms is very similar to test retest, With test retest, I give you the questionnaire today and I give you the same questionnaire 2 weeks from now. With equivalent forms, I will develop one set of questions to measure inner directedness, and then I can develop another set of questions to measure inner directedness. In other words, I try to develop 2 questionnaires that measure the same construct. And then I will give you both questionnaires, and then I will correlate the scores across those 2 questionnaires. Because my belief is that the 2 questionnaires, the 2 sets of questions are what? Equivalent or similar, right? So this ain't test retest with the same questionnaire. There's 2 questionnaires that's supposed to be the same. So one questionnaire we got 8 items that measure inner directedness, and the next questionnaire we got 8 other items measuring inner directedness, and I do the correlation for 2. That makes sense to y'all? That don't make one bit of sense to me. That is one form of reliability that I think they should throw through the door. Look, you know how hard it is to even come up with these first 8. I know about developing skills. Girl, because you get wrong. You can imagine trying to develop two scales measuring the same thing? Who can get that, dude? Think about it for truth, Mr. Harper. That's bare junk. Because chances are, folks, they may measuring the same thing. You might got 6 items in the item scale that measuring 6 things the same, and then they got 2 items off, and both scales are same, because it's just hard developing one scale. So to develop 2 is ridiculously hard. Yes, yes.
In the first questionnaire, you want the respondent to understand the second questionnaire.
You wanted to understand the 2 questionnaires the same way. That's what I mean. Because guess what? Because you didn't get it right. Getting the 2 questionnaires that are equivalent is a very difficult. So the issue to me with equivalent forms is the validity issue. Because think about it. Validity is where it starts. Because if the 2 questionnaires really are not equivalent, they don't tap into the same construct, in the same measure, in the same way, trying to match whether you're reliable across the 2, well, that don't make no sense, because the 2 questionnaires are the same to begin with. So for me, the issue, and I guess Daniel Gates will raise that issue too, is that developing 2 equivalent questionnaires is gurkle. All right? And most of the time it's not valid. All right? So if I'm asking you something that, to your mind, different, how you going to answer the 2 of them in the same way? They're different. The system is a systematic error. All right? So if they got error in the system, then you can respond reliably. They're different. All right? So that's the problem with equivalent forms. Y'all still following me? All right, let me say it again. Look. I am assuming, right, as a researcher, right, 2 forms, that these are the same 2 forms to you. 8 questions in this form, 8 questions in this form, but there's the same 2 forms to you. Right? That is very difficult to do. All right? To measure the same construct with different questions twice. Because sometimes you don't even you got so much questions, you still ain't tap into the construct yet. Because you still don't understand the belly of it. You ain't in the bullseye. So I assuming now that you hit the bullseye twice. See the bullseye that show you hit it twice. So when you answer these questions, it's going to be the same thing as when you answer these. So then they're going to correlate your responses on these 2 questions, and they're going to be the same. But you're still not in bullseye, because even if you might not be in bullseye with any 2, but you might hit the bullseye with 1, but then try to hit it again with the second one. So if you hit the bullseye with this one and you hit the bullseye with this one, when I measure your responses across the 2 of these, they can match. No. All right? That's the problem with equivalent forms. That is people trying to fool themselves for us. That is overly optimistic researchers. That thing don't work. All right? Because the error is going to be in the system, because the 2 sets of questions are going to be different. Some way, somehow. Unless this is how stupid you do it. I am a true Barbadian, and then on the next questionnaire, I am a real Barbadian. Y'all understand what he's saying there? Those questions really different? No. So if you could tell me that you can develop 2 totally different questionnaires that tap into the same construct, wonderful. But I don't buy it. Who this belong to? I don't believe it. All right, and then you correlate across the 2. So how do real researchers measure reliability today? Because so far we shoot holes in the first 2, ain't it? So let's talk about what we do. We use split half, which we're moving away from, and then we use something called internal consistency and Cronbach's alpha. What is this split half? All right, look. To do split half or to do Cronbach's alpha, there must be redundancy in the questions. When I say redundancy in questions, what I mean? I got several questions on the questionnaire that are asking you basically the same what? The same thing. can decide that I would just use question 3 to measure inner directedness. No, I can decide I would just use question 8 to measure inner directedness. I spend a good deal of time trying to decide how I feel about things. That introspection. I could just use that question. But really and truthfully, if I just ask you one question, and you strongly agree to it, I could walk away and say, I measure inner directedness with that one question. But there is no other question that I can test against to see that you were measuring it in truth. I could only measure reliability when I put some type of repeat in there, which is what I have done with tests and retests, or if I put in some redundancy. I can only know if you were responding to 8 correctly if I put in more redundant questions that are like 8 that you measured, that you answer the same way. So the first 2 reliability tests use a repeat. I repeat the questionnaire. Or I make a second questionnaire and try to do like a repeat and measure. Not with split half and internal consistency. We move away from repeat to redundancy. That is where now we put several questions on one questionnaire that are supposed to be measuring what? Basically the same thing. That is why whenever Dwayne and Dion give you questionnaires, they give you questionnaires that have 10 items that measure the same thing. Because that is what we have stepped up to as researchers. We use redundancy. But you will find that a lot of the questionnaires that will come to you from Barbadian business houses will not have any redundancy in it. You realize that? So the question does be, were the persons really answering reliably or not? We have no way to test. Because they're not doing test retest, they're not giving you equivalent forms, and there's no redundancy in the questionnaire. So how do I know that what you really want to say at 8 you said? I know because when I check what you said at 7 and 6 and 3 and 4 and say, they matched. All right, so the issue here now with split half and internal consistency is building in now redundancy right there on the spot. No testing and retesting. Redundancy on the spot. And then matching how you speak across those items. Y'all are still following me? So that's why we have here now 8 questions to measure the construct that we call inner directedness. Or you will hear people say the scale has 8 items in it. Or the construct has 8 items in it. The construct being inner directedness. Because if you're highly inner directed, you will be responding. You're strongly agreeing to these. But if you're low on the inner directedness scale, you're gonna be giving me low responses. True? Good. So let's talk about this split half. Split half is just that. When the responses come into me, the system will, there are how many items there? 8. The system will split the items randomly in half. So if you tell the system to run a split half reliability test for you, it might pick out item 2, item 5, item 1 and item 8, and then that is one, it split it randomly, and then out here is item 6, it got to be no item, what else is here, 3, item 4, and what's the last one? Item 7. The system is going to split them. And then the system will correlate, it will look at the total scores on these items or the average. So it will work out the average on item 2. Maybe add that to the average on item 5. Or it will look at the total score on item 2, plus the total score on item 5, plus the total score on that, plus the total score on that. And then it will correlate those totals or those averages between the 2 sets of items. So it will correlate the responses for this whole group of items, and then with the responses on this group of items. And then if the correlation is high, then I assume that all of these items were in the respondent's mind, measuring basically the same thing. Huh? Okay. Now, we accept that if we run a split half or a Cronbach alpha and we get a correlation of 0.7 or higher, we accept that the respondents were seeing those items basically the same way. That is the cutoff. It was developed by a guy, well, I can't remember his name now, Nunnally. In 1967 and in 1970, a guy called Nunnally published 2 studies on what we would accept. Because let me tell you something, see? Everything in statistics does be an accepted standard. You know, see this thing about 95% confidence and things? We agree that we're going to accept that. All right? So we've agreed as social scientists that if we find a 0.07 or higher correlation between 2 sets of items on a split half, that we will agree that the respondents were reliable. They were reading the questions and they understood the questions to mean basically the same. So this is what I'm saying. With this inner directedness scale, then you might be low on inner directedness, but you would have scored low on all 8 of those items. And even if you were high on inner directedness, you would have scored high on all 8 of those items. Or your responses would be similar. If I get a correlation of 0.7, it would be similar at least 70% of the time. You get what I'm saying? Because if I get a correlation of 0.7, I would know that my entire sample were similar in their responses to those 8 items at least 70% of the time. And I accept that as being adequate reliability. Everybody would like a reliability assessment of 1. Because it would tell me that those 8 questions meant exactly the same thing to you and you answered them exactly the same way each time if it was 100 people. But that really happens. Because even though I'm measuring the scale of inner directedness, I'm tapping into the construct, but these questions might still have slight little differences in your mind. Right? But I'm using them to get into what is inner directedness in you and in you and in you and in you. But the only way I can ask the same question the same way is if I ask all 8 questions the same way. I'm a true Barbadian. I'm a true Barbadian. You say, this is madness, but I'm not answering this question anymore. The person who came up with this is a madman. Y'all get that? So we've actually been trying to ask some questions like this, right? To get into an attitude. Saying in somebody's mind, to get into the mind, and to really tap into who they are. And we might not always do it right. You know? All right, so this internal consistency. Hold on a minute. I might split the items this way once we split half, right? And I come up with a correlation between these 2 halves of 0.83. That look good. 83% of the time, people respond about the same. But check here with me. Suppose now the system has split it this way, look. 2, 7, 8, 6, and 1, 3, 5, 4. Is it possible that I could, when I run the second split half, that I maybe get a correlation of 0.86? Not 0.83? Because there are slight differences on how the persons respond on the items. So the average score is a little different. Because look, here I'm averaging 2 plus 5 plus 1 plus 8, but here I'm averaging 2 plus 7 plus 8 plus 6. So I might find a slightly stronger correlation depending on how the system split the items. because there's a random split. So I might split them one way and I get that correlation. I split them another way and I get third correlation. And split them another way. So you know what? Cronbach alpha cell, Cronbach cell. This is how we gonna be super accurate. We gonna let the system split all the items, all the different ways it could split it. Split it this way. So y'all know about permutations and those types of things, right? Split it all the different ways you could split it. So if it's split this way, and it's 0.83, and then when the split now 2,7, and when the put 5, 4, 3, 8, and then 2, 7, 6, all the different ways that might come up with a different correlation. So you know what Cronbach alpha does? It simply takes all the correlations of the various splits, the 0.83 plus the 0.86 plus whatever the correlations is, add them up together and average. So it's run every split, 2 splits. Split them down the middle here. Split them down the middle there. Run the correlation. Run the correlation. Split, run the correlation. Split. And then they just take all the correlations and add them up and divide them by the number of splits. And whatever you come up with, the average correlation of all the splits is what Cronbach alpha coefficient is. So it's more accurate than the split half. The split half is only a single split. All right? But Cronbach says, no, split them all the different ways. And every time you split them in two, run the correlation between two halves. Split them in two again, run the correlation. And SPSS does do that for you in a split second, literally. It's do all them splits. And then it runs the correlation across all the splits, and then it tells you the overall average correlation then. And if it's 0.07 or higher, we accept that the scale is a reliable scale. Do you have that? 0.7 or higher. Mm-hmm. All right, let's take a little 5-minute here, and then we will talk about validity. If you ask me, situation 2 is the saddest situation on this. This is where the researcher didn't really, he might have a set of questions together and they mean the same thing to the consumer answering, but really and truthfully he ain't really measured the construct that he really set out to measure. It's sad. So he has reliability because you see the questions the same way, but the questions aren't really measuring what he wants to measure. All right? And that is, as we said earlier, that is systematic error. Error in the system. And how is he going to uncover it? How do we, as researchers, ensure that what we really want to ask people, we succeed in asking them? So I'm going to show you now 4 ways that we measure validity. The weakest form of validity is face validity. That the degree to which a measurement instrument seems to measure what it is supposed to measure as judged by the researchers. But the researcher going to say, no, look at the questions and say, yeah, I assume that, yeah, people can understand what I mean by this. So he is taking the questionnaire at its face, or each question at its face. It look right. That is the weakest form of validity. Because that is where the researcher assumes that the persons who will be answering the questionnaires is me. Because I understand what I'm asking, so them understand what you're asking them too. Them is me is them, we good. Now, content validity. The researcher now broadens the net. He don't sit down and come up with a set of questions and say, yeah, these questions measuring whatever. He does do a late review. And he does look at old cases where a particular construct was measured before. Your book has a real good example of it, where it talks about the McDonald's example. Your text, you see McDonald's example in your text? That's a good example in there. I don't think I could do better than that. And it speaks about measuring the store image of McDonald's. Right? The company asked you to measure the store image of McDonald's. And you came up with these 4 questions. What were the 4 questions the researcher developed? Hold them there for me. We asked about. Huh? He asked about the buildings, the landscaping, cleanliness of the parking lot, attractiveness of the. That's how the researcher, if he was using face validity, coming up with, in his mind, the questions that will measure image. If he steps something out to content validity, he might do some focus groups. He might look at how KFC measured its image. He would do a little review. And he will realize, wait, there are a lot of other ways that people, in their minds, measure the image of a store. They look at, for example, what? The presentation of the food, quality, taste, the level of customer service. I remember once I was taken to the restaurant at Sept for free, and that's the first time I know people used to come brushing up crumbs all the time. Immediately I had that this was a high image restaurant, ain't it? And put in the little bowl that apparently Oprah the drink. You all to hear about Oprah? First when she went to a fancy restaurant to put the little bowl with the water, she drank it. Poor thing. She didn't know that she was supposed to, it was wash the fingertips. What's so funny, Dawn? Alright, so image is measured in more than buildings, landscaping. Face validity, that is all he came up with. But then when you step up to content validity and you begin to ask other experts how you will measure store image, you do a lit review, and you also do a pre-testing. That is where I sit down with a focus group and I say, so when you think about the image of a fast food, what is some of the things you just think? And then the questions that come out to them, you're with me? Then I will get a more, I should say, comprehensive understanding of what a fast food store image is, and hopefully then my instrument that I develop would have content validity. It will have the content coming from people who actually choose stores, past literature, and what other experts will tell me should be involved in the measurement of store image. I show you how you get too much information, right? They can't change the processes overnight. They have to make sure that they're clean before they did that. Cause I went to a restaurant a few years back, and the things just taste real good. And the girl, she decided now that the place they had to put in, like the oil is for the chips in. My girl come up with this white thing. And then a bucket in the tank like lard, right? And she's filling back up the thing now that is for the chips in, and she digging up this thing and dropping it in. And digging up. I mean, this white thing, that look like if you get, like, that would just take you arteries and just freeze them instantly. So she keep dipping up this thing, right? And all of the people there start looking at one another like, what? I mean, if she did do it once, the girl would not stop going down in this bucket. So I hope that McDonald's know what to do it. Okay. Spotless. What the door believe? You believe? You believe that was staged? Yeah. 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 It might be competitive. Yeah. Yeah. For real. But they ain't much you can hurry with pizza, but let me tell you, see them burgers? I hope when I know when I eat it. I hope we know what we eating. Yeah. What's that? I can't sit down with fast food because let me tell you, I had some of them that Wing Ding special a couple of days ago, and I tell you, it helped open my appetite. It was good. All right, so y'all understand content validity here now. Face validity, that is what we would have come up with. Content validity, because we open ourselves up to what the market felt was store image. We looked at what other experts would have, how they would have measured it before, so we did a little review. We might come up with a better scale. All right, content validity. Now, let's talk about criterion-related validity. As we are moving up, we are getting more stringent in the measure of validity. So criterion-related validity is stronger than content validity. Because I can tell you something about content validity, right? I might go there and I might get all these different ways of measuring and I slump it together in my scale. But you know, I might still not know for sure that I'm in the bullseye. Because a lot of the stuff I might be braining might be extraneous matter. Because the persons who went before me that I drew on their literature, they made mistakes too. Alright? So criterion-related validity is a higher form of validity because this is here now where we begin to do statistical tests for validity. Face validity and content, we are doing a statistical test, you know. We just, with content, we just dragging everything. And so we must be measuring it because we take piece from Jim and piece from John and we talk to this body, so we got to be right. We in the bullseye. But when you step up to criterion-related validity, you start to do testing. If I develop a measure of body fat, 10 questions that will measure how fat you should be or how slim he should be or whatever. And I say that this measure is supposed to predict the propensity to have a heart attack. Now we're looking at relationships between variables. And persons who are high on my measurement do have heart attacks in the future. So when I measured you on that scale, you did get a heart attack in the future. It tells me that I probably was valid in the development of that body fat scale. Because it has predictive validity. It was able, when I measured you on it, and then 5 years down the line, I realized that, shoot, everybody that measured how on my body fat scale really did get a heart attack. And it was supposed to predict heart attacks. Then I know where this scale really was predictive in truth. So it was valid. It did predict what it was supposed to predict. And if persons who have just had heart attacks, when I measure them on my scale, they're high on it, then my scale has what we call concurrent validity. And if my scale has concurrent validity, and it has predictive validity, then I say it has criterion-related validity. It actually predicted something that it was supposed to predict. It predicted another phenomenon then. So if it's supposed to predict another phenomenon, then it must be right because it did predict it. Are y'all following me? So here's where you do some statistical measurement now to prove that, well, this is supposed to predict that. So if this scale was measured correctly, if it was valid in developing it, if it wasn't valid, then it would have predicted that. All right? So if you then test your scale, we're talking about testing it here now, and if it predicts what it's supposed to predict, then it has criterion-related validity. Right. Sensitive questions are questions that people aren't willing to answer. That's the reality. All of us have questions that are sensitive to us. You know, you might ask somebody about the parents. You know, not knowing that the druggies all over the place. You know, but that seems that is an alright question to ask, but not to that individual. Alright, so sometimes questions don't even appear sensitive to you, but they are. Alright, and that is why we as researchers need to say, look at this question here. They got anything here that you think might offend somebody? Alright, and then how can I ask it? We as researchers, we are also very conscious of things like social desirability bias. Like, for example, with my patient, I ask a lot of people, would you buy Bajan goods? They're all going to say yes. Because you're supposed to be patriotic, but then when you get the kind of the supermarket and you open up the bags, not wanting that made in Barbados. So there's something as we call social desirability bias. This is what the respondent would want me to say. So that's what I'm going to say.